Welcome back to budget 2018-19 discussion. In the last session we have discussed about the major taxation proposals of this year's budget, that is budget 2018-19. Today we are going to discuss another important topic of this budget, that is regarding fiscal deficit. Now before going to regarding why this fiscal deficit is important for your this year budget, or for as well as for your this for your coming prelims, is that this government for the first time in its fourth financial year could not able to achieve the target set by the government. So the fiscal deficit target set by the government in the last budget they were not able to achieve it, and thereby a situation have happened what is called as fiscal slippage. So 2017-18 fiscal slippage have happened. So UPSC can ask this question, okay, what do you mean by fiscal slippage? Many times in the last few 1 or 2 months that it's almost clear that the government will not able to achieve the target set for this financial year. So since this concept is in news, fiscal slippage, so UPSC either can ask why in 2017-18 financial year the fiscal deficit is higher, or they can ask what is this fiscal slippage, or what is the reason for fiscal slippage to happen in 2017-18. So before going to that, first you understand what you mean by fiscal slippage. Fiscal slippage is nothing but if the target set by the government for a particular financial year, that is the fiscal deficit target, if it increases or if it deviates or if it goes high beyond the target set by the government for that particular year, then we call it as fiscal slippage. So if the fiscal deficit target is higher than actual in the actual current year, that situation is called as fiscal slippage. Now why this year, that is 2017-18, what is the reason for high fiscal deficit in 2017-18? And that could be a potential question for this year prelims. Now before that, you need to understand the concept, what is fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is nothing but, it's in simple term, fiscal deficit in simple term is the fresh loans raised by the government in that particular financial year, or it is the government borrowing for that particular financial year. So there is a formula for fiscal deficit. It is total expenditure minus revenue receipts minus non-debt capital receipts, or you add revenue receipts and non-debt capital receipts and deduct it from the total expenditure. You will get fiscal deficit. What balance will be there? That is the government borrowing. So that's the formula. Now, so this is you need to, in 2017 prelims, UPSC have in a 2-statement question. One of the question was that in the last decade, fiscal deficit was continuously increasing. But actually, it is not the case. In some year in the last decade, there was an increase, and in some decades some years there is consistent decrease also. So mainly, once this government came into power, the first 3 years of this government, there were consistently the fiscal deficit was coming down. So in 2015-16 it was 3.9%, in 16-17 it was 3.5%, and in 17-18 budget it set a target of 3.2%, but in the revised estimate it has reached 3.5%. So this is the reason why fiscal deficit is important for you. In 2017-18 the target was 3.2%, but it has increased to 3.5%. So 17-18 fiscal deficit as well as the 16-17 is same. So the government could not able to bring down the fiscal deficit in 2017-18. And already, so because of this change in this revised estimate, so in the current, means the present budget, that is 2018-19 budget, is expecting the fiscal deficit target to be, is estimating the fiscal deficit target to be 3.3%. So this is also important, okay. What they may not ask the particular data, but just have an idea that this is a very important component of this year's budget. So the 2018-19 budget aims to achieve the fiscal deficit target of 3.3% of GDP. Now, so since, see, we already have a fiscal deficit roadmap or fiscal consolidation roadmap plan set by the FRBM, a very important committee, what is called as FRBM committee or Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Committee. It's a very important current affair. So, since we are not able to achieve that roadmap, already we have deviated from the roadmap, this budget have set a new fiscal deficit roadmap. The new roadmap is that in 2017-18, now in 17-18 it is 3.5%. So in the coming year it will be 3.3%, the government will try to achieve 3.3, and then in the next year it will be 3.1%, and in 2021 the government will achieve the target of 3%. But if you compare it with the what target set by the FRBM committee warned the fiscal deficit target to be 3% up to 1920. See, already I told you that if actually the government aim was that by 18-19 the government was expecting to reach 3% of fiscal deficit target, but in 17-18 revised estimate it has touched 3.5%. It will not be able in a position to achieve this 3%. It have again reduced the target to 3.3%. It will be able to achieve only 3.3%. But what FRBM committee have said, so this is very important, what is the target set by the FRBM committee? FRBM committee want the government up to 1920 to reach the target of 3%, and in this year, that is 2021, it want the government to bring down the fiscal deficit to 2.8%, and after 2 years, that is by 22-23, it want the government, union government fiscal deficit to be 2.5%. So this is what is called as fiscal consolidation. It means that the government borrowing, fiscal deficit is government borrowing, in proportion to GDP have to be brought down. So the burden of the government, mainly in the form of interest payment, will come down. But in 17-18, instead of fiscal consolidation, situation is now of slippage. So because of high fiscal deficit, there are many problems the economy will face in the form of the bond yield will harden or the bond yield will increase. Then it will have an impact over the inflation. It means in the sense that because of more money spending by the government, it will result in inflation, as well as already credit rating agencies looking into the one of the most important indicator which the international credit rating agency looks into is the fiscal deficit target. So already because of the last few years the government achievement, Moody in the last year in 2017, that is few months back, have improved the credit rating of India's sovereign credit rating. So this higher fiscal deficit, if the government is not in a position to achieve this target, it will have an impact over the sovereign credit rating of India. Okay, so all are the impact this high fiscal this fiscal slippage or high fiscal deficit can have on India. Okay, so now we need to look into the reason behind high fiscal deficit in 2017-18. So if you look into the expenditure part, one of the reason for high fiscal deficit in 2017-18 is there is an increase in the total expenditure from the budget estimate of 2017-18, and that high expenditure, the increase in the total expenditure is mainly because of revenue expenditure. So if you look into the budget estimate of 2017-18, the government, but as in the 17-18 budget estimate, the total expenditure is 21.47 lakh crore, and in the revised estimate there have been an increase from 21.547 to 22.18. So there have been an increase in the total expenditure. But if you look into the revenue expenditure as per the budget estimate is 18.37, but that is now increased to 19.44. So there is a drastic increase in the revenue expenditure. In other way, there is a reduction in the capital expenditure, and we know that. So in 1718, so one of the negative impact of this high fiscal deficit to our economy is that this high expenditure is mainly to revenue expenditure, not to capital expenditure. Capital expenditure is a quality expenditure, which will bring return to the economy, which will bring investment as well as higher growth to the economy. So that has not happened because of this high fiscal deficit. Okay, so that one point you keep in mind. Okay, so one of the reasons for high fiscal deficit is high expenditure, mainly from the revenue expenditure, not from the capital expenditure. So that's a very important point you need to note down. Now when you look into the revenue receipts component, that is tax revenue and non-tax revenue component, okay, nothing has happened to tax revenue component. So if you look into the net tax revenue, so we already discussed in our earlier that economic survey, we are in the part 2 of economic survey, we had discussed about fiscal developments. So that time I had explained what is gross tax revenue and net tax revenue. So the budget tax revenue is net tax revenue. So net tax revenue is after devolving the taxes to the states from the gross tax revenue. What the government get is what is called as net tax revenue. So the net tax revenue as per the budget estimate was 12.27 lakh crore, but in the revised estimate, the tax revenue, net tax revenue have increased. So the tax revenue have increased in 1718. So that's a very important point to note down. Okay, the high fiscal deficit, it's mainly because of one, high revenue expenditure. It's not because of tax revenue. So tax revenue rather have increased in 1718. Now we look into the non-tax revenue. In the non-tax revenue component, non-tax revenue is another reason for high fiscal deficit. So the budget estimate under non-tax revenue is 2.89 lakh crore, but what we have achieved is 2.34 lakh crore. So there is a big reduction in the non-tax revenue component. Mainly is because of in 2017-18 spectrum auction have not happened. The government was expecting in 17-18 no revenue from the spectrum auction. Another reason for lesser non-tax revenue is the RBI dividend given to the government is lesser in 2017-18. So because of this reason, because of lower non-tax revenue, UPSC may ask this conventional question: which of the following are the components of non-tax revenue? So that is a very potential question for your coming prelims. So the second reason for high fiscal deficit is lower non-tax revenue. Now when you look into the non-debt capital receipts, the major non-debt capital receipts is disinvestment. Even disinvestment is a record for this year, in the sense that in 17-18, for the first time, that's another area we need to discuss in detail. Okay, in 17-18, the government budgeted target was 72,500 crore, but till now, that is now 2 months more is left to complete this financial year. Already we have collected near to 92,000 crore, and the government, the finance minister is expecting that in the next 2 months the target will be 1 lakh crore. So that is the record disinvestment target. For the first time, the government in India's history, for the first time, the target set in the budget estimate will be crossed for the first time in India, that is in 2017-18. So even after higher disinvestment, better performance in the tax revenue front, our fiscal deficit is high, mainly because of two factors, mainly because of higher expenditure from revenue expenditure as well as lower non-tax revenue. So from this area, you can expect a prelims question. So you need to revise on the fiscal deficit components, where why there is high fiscal deficit, and then fiscal slippage as a concept you can expect, and the current the new roadmap. What is the new roadmap for the coming financial year, and how it has deviated from the FRBM committee. FRBM committee is a very important current affair. We'll be dealing it under the current affair section. Okay, so this is regarding the fiscal deficit component of this budget 2018-19. It's a very important area. Note down this point. This is more than sufficient for you. Thank you.